Okay, welcome to the Czech Museum Houston. My name is Johanna. I am the director here. We are really just thrilled to be able to have this fantastic series of events that we have going on. This will be the first of 4 events, and maybe more moving forward, we'll see, where we will be discussing, and hopefully you all will get very excited and want to read 3 of Milan Kundera's great novels, The Joke, The Unbearable Lightness of Being, and the Book of Laughter and Forgetting, which is personally my favorite, so hopefully you stick around for September when we do that. It'll be really great.
Or come back for it. Yeah, you could skip one and then come back for that.
No, come live here with me. I live under my desk. You can have this room for yourself. You guys will love it. We are really honored and pleased to be doing this with the Honors College at University of Houston, here at Czech Museum Houston. And we have 2 esteemed gentlemen with us who are just really delightful and dynamic conversationalists, and I can't wait for you all to be able to hear this. We have Bob Cremins and Dan Price, and Alice will be introducing and giving you all of their wonderful bios in just a moment. We are doing this about Milan Kundera, 1, because a lot of people are interested in him. 2, he passed away last year at the age of 96, 94, I can do that. 96. And so he's sort of still in your minds a little bit. And he's been a very interesting character and very important to Czechs and non-Czechs as well. So I will let the experts speak more on that. But while we're here, thank you for coming, and don't forget to read.
I just want to do a brief introduction of these scholars we have here. So we have Dan Price here, and he has taught at the University of Houston's Honors College since 2000. And has a PhD in philosophy, specializing in French and German aesthetics and ethics. This introduction is so complicated for me. But after several books on an intersection of ethic, community, and art, he has spent the last decade working toward practical application of philosophy. He directs both the Community Health Worker Initiative and the Data and Society program at the Honors College at University of Houston. And Robert Cremins is a senior lecturer in the Honors College at the University of Houston, where he also directs creative work pre-professional program. He is an author of novels, A Sort of Homecoming, and Sent in Devils. Maybe next time you need to bring your books too. His short fiction has appeared in Critical Quarterly, the Dublin Review, and been broadcast on BBC Radio. But we are very thrilled to have these 2 gentlemen here and sort of set us off into this book series, because they will have something erudite and enlightened to share with us, and we will get so much more meaning out of reading these brilliant novels in the next few months. So welcome, and thank you everyone for coming, and enjoy.
Thank you so much to Joanna and Alice for all the organization that they've done to make this evening and this program possible. How's the volume? Pretty good, okay. I'm in a strange situation. I'm talking about a great Czech writer to so many people of Czech and Slovakian heritage, and some people in the audience who I know, because I've read their reporting on this, who were actually in Prague for the Prague Spring. In 1968, I was busy being born in Ireland. So why am I here? Good question. I think Milan Kundera helps me out here. He says several times, and this is a preoccupation of his, that history happens to small nations. Big nations make history, history happens to small nations. And I'm from a small European nation too. And I think maybe that's one of the reasons why Kundera and his writing appealed to me all the way back in the 1980s. I've written a little talk for this evening called Milan Kundera and the Wisdom of the Novel. I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read about 80% of this. I noticed rereading it today, there's a kind of natural break in it. Being Irish, I do talk a lot, and I've got to watch that. And so at that point, I think there'll be enough prompts and cues for Dan to respond for a few minutes. Then we're going to open it up to questions and contributions from the floor. And if there is any silence, awkward or otherwise, I do have about another page and a half with which we could finish things off. It includes a pretty good anecdote involving Czech literature that happened to me. So we could finish up with that, or if there's a need for more material or content, we could go to that. So let's get things rolling here with Milan Kundera and the wisdom of the novel. In the mid-1970s, Penguin Books launched an important new publishing venture, a series called Writers from the Other Europe. Its general editor was the leading American novelist, Philip Roth, who took a deep interest in the plight of free-thinking writers stranded on the censorious side of the Iron Curtain. Roth at the time explained that the purpose of the project was, quote, to bring together outstanding and influential works of fiction by Eastern European writers. In many instances, they will be writers who, though recognized as powerful forces in their own culture, are virtually unknown in America, end quote. And Roth could have added unknown virtually in Western Europe too. One of the first titles published in that series was Milan Kundera's short story collection, Laughable Loves. A note at the end of the collection tells us that these often sly stories of amorous misadventure were, quote, written in Bohemia between 1958 and 1968. In other words, during the years in which Czechoslovakia's Stalinist winter finally began to thaw out and the green shoots of the Prague Spring appeared. One of those being, most notably, Milan Kundera's first novel, The Joke, which will be the first title we read for our book club, one of the great flowers of the Prague Spring. The humor that these titles, The Joke and Laughable Loves, allude to, not only indicate one of Kundera's key literary values, but also, quote, the emancipation of cultural life in communist Czechoslovakia at that time. I'm quoting from Kundera's 2005 book-length essay, The Curtain, where he states, I often said that the Prague Spring began 8 years before 1968 with the UNESCO plays staged at the little theater called On the Balustrade. He recalls, it was there I first saw a performance of UNESCO, and it was unforgettable. The explosion of an imagination, the eruption of a disrespectful spirit. But for Kundera, if one is looking for intelligent comedy, thoughtful irreverence, the literary form par excellence is the novel. Why? Well, he gave a memorable answer in a 1984 interview with British writer Ian McEwan. Nobody can accuse us of phoning it in tonight. Okay. I'll take that little opportunity to get a little water. He told Ian McEwan, quote, because the novel has an inbuilt skepticism in relation to all systems of thought, novels naturally begin by assuming that it is essentially impossible to fit human life into any kind of system. This way of looking at the world is what Kundera elsewhere called the wisdom of the novel. A nimble antipathy towards ideological overreach, a comic talent for the discovery of ambiguous terrain, a resilient defense of certain bedrock civic values. Quote, respect for the individual, for his or her original thought, for his or her right to an inviolable private life. That quote is from Kundera's acceptance speech when, in 1985, he was awarded the Jerusalem Prize for the freedom of the individual in society. So Kundera sees the modern novel as a mode of thinking. It's a form of inquiry often in tune with and influenced by modern philosophy, but retaining its own autonomy and procedures. In his 1983 essay, The Depreciated Legacy of Cervantes, Kundera explains his view of this relationship between fiction and philosophy. On the one hand, he is inspired by what he calls, quote, a beautiful and almost magical phrase found in the philosophy of Martin Heidegger, the forgetting of being, an outbreak of amnesia that has afflicted humanity since the scientific revolution. This term, forgetting of being, is a signpost pointing towards an existential landscape that Kundera believes the novel well equipped to explore. Indeed, he declares, rather polemically in this essay, that, quote, a novel that does not uncover a hitherto unknown segment of existence is immoral. Knowledge is the novel's only morality. On the other hand, Kundera has his reservations about philosophy. It was, after all, one of the greatest modern philosophers, Descartes, who laid the foundation for that problematic scientific revolution. In the essay, Kundera expresses a wary respect for Descartes, quote, to take Descartes' thinking self as the basis of everything and to be alone before the universe is to adopt an attitude which Hegel was right to call heroic. But that wary respect puts into sharp relief the warm regard Kundera has for another cultural giant of the 17th century, a writer whose name is, for Kundera, emblematic of the novelistic intelligence. Quote, to take the world as relative, as Cervantes did, to be obliged to face not a single absolute truth, but a heap of contradictory truths, truths embodied in imaginary thinking selves called characters. Kundera loves italics. So every time I do that tone, it's Kundera italics. Truths embodied in imaginary thinking selves called characters. To have as one's only certainty the wisdom of uncertainty requires no less courage. There it is, folks, in a nutshell. The wisdom of the novel is the wisdom of uncertainty. Paradoxically, and he is a connoisseur of paradox, Kundera in his novels proceeds with great confidence to deliver this vision of uncertainty. One example of this confidence is the daring, direct way he begins an early chapter of The Unbearable Lightness of Being. Quote, I have been thinking about Tomas for many years. That sentence made quite an impression on me when I first read it in the late 1980s. I didn't really appreciate until then that you were allowed that degree of freedom in writing fiction. Kundera is very sure of his identity as an existential as opposed to a psychological, historical, or political novelist. There is, of course, significant psychological, historical, and political content in his novels, especially the three titles we have picked for the book club, most notably the stories related to the convulsions of the communist era in Czechoslovakia. But both in theory and in practice, Kundera was insistent upon the primacy of the existentialist character of his novels. but that is existentialist with a small e. He was not a card-carrying member of the French philosophical movement, existentialism. In The Art of the Novel, Kundera declares this to be one of his aesthetic principles. Quote, "Of the historical circumstances, I keep only those that create a revelatory existential situation for my characters." There's that word again, existential. Now, this too is a paradox. As for so many of us in North America and Western Europe who began reading Kundera in the 1980s, Kundera was the writer from the other Europe, a leading dissident voice from the Eastern Bloc, and the quintessential Czech literary figure. Around the time Philip Roth had republished Laughable Loves in the mid-70s, Kundera and his wife Vera had moved permanently to France. And so for us, he was also the very image of the modern émigré writer of conscience. Here was also someone who said of the 1968 Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia, which began just 3 days after he finished writing the last story in Laughable Loves, August 1968, truly was the end of an era for him. He said of the Russian invasion, "In my life, it was a conflagration." At the time, a gloomy Kundera did not believe that the Czech lands would ever regain their autonomy. Quote, "My evaluation of the situation was wrong," he wrote almost 40 years later in The Curtain. "But despite my error, or perhaps because of it, a great experience was engraved on my existential memory. Ever since then, I know what no Frenchman, no American can know. I know what it is for a man to live through the death of his nation." This shattering experience made Kundera, quote, "hypersensitive to the fate of small nations like Ireland." But it did not make him more interested in Czech identity and history per se. For so many of us, his international readers, Kundera's novels were formative experiences when it came to an imaginative understanding of the modern Czech experience. The Book of Laughter and Forgetting, Johanna's favorite, and The Unbearable Lightness of Being, favorite of so many people, they transported us to Prague, magic Prague. But what's remarkable is the extent to which, after the global success in the 1980s of Unbearable Lightness of Being, the Paris-based Kundera became decidedly less Czech. The plot thickens. Well, as an artist, he had always been interested in Czech particulars, just to the extent to which he could generalize and discover existential truths. But the first novel Kundera published after the fall of the Berlin Wall, Immortality, 1990, is set almost entirely in Paris. Take away the title page, where we learn the book was, quote, translated from the Czech by Peter Kusi, and this fiction would appear to be the work of a French writer. Kundera, who had been writing nonfiction in French since at least the 1980s, then abandoned Czech itself as the compositional language of his fiction. The remaining novels of his career, Slowness, Identity, which is to do with personal identity, not Czech identity, Ignorance, and The Festival of Insignificance, they were all written in French. Of these, only Ignorance, 2000, really concerns Bohemia. It's the story that I had a decade earlier, about 1990, hoped and perhaps assumed Kundera was working on. the story of the emigres' return to Czechoslovakia after the fall of the communist regime. Reading Ignorance was, for me, a bittersweet experience, as it was a reminder of how well Kundera writes about the Czech experience and the opportunity cost for his readers of those novels, such as The Plodding Immortality, that are more broadly about the indignities of living in the vulgar, homogenized world of late capitalism. We have had plenty of other writers who can chronicle for us the moronic inferno, to use a phrase beloved by Martin Amis, the moronic inferno of contemporary international life. And indeed, the moronic inferno novels of Martin Amis could often be very funny, whereas Kundera, that champion of comedy, could often be, in his Francophone novels, something of a curmudgeon. So I do wish that post-Unbearable Lightness of Being, Kundera had given us more of this kind of homeland-specific meditation. This is from Ignorance. Quote, "The history of the Czechs in the 20th century is graced with a remarkable mathematical beauty due to the triple repetition of the number 20. This is the beginning of a little essayistic island in the narrative sea that is a Kundera speciality." You'll recognize it from some of his other novels, maybe. The Irish writer John Banville liked this riff on what he calls the repeating loops of Czech history, 1918 to 38, 1948 to 1968, 1969 to 1989. Banville liked it so much that he included the entire passage as a footnote in his short 2003 book, Prague Pictures. But again, there's that bittersweet reading experience. I wish we'd got more Prague Pictures from Kundera himself in the last 30 years of his writing career. But now the good news. Dramatic pause. Prague Pictures and Bohemian Rhapsodies abound in the three novels we have chosen for the book club. With The Joke, The Unbearable Lightness of Being, and The Book of Laughter and Forgetting, the Czechness is baked in. In 1995, Kundera declared that the carefully revised French translations of his earlier books, quote, have become, so to speak, more faithful to the Czech originals than the originals themselves. That's what Paris does to you. But the narratives remained rooted in what Kundera still called, in the late years of his publishing life, my Bohemia. There's the personal note, my Bohemia. More precisely, Kundera was Moravian. Though he developed as a writer in Prague, his hometown was Brno. The city's other world-famous cultural son, Leos Janáček, whom we heard earlier, died the year before Kundera's birth in 1929. But the composer must have been a living presence in Kundera's Brno home growing up. Milan's father, musicologist Ludwig Kundera, was a protege of Janáček's, and the resources of musical composition left an indelible mark on the younger Kundera's approach to writing. His novels are full of motifs, movements, variations, orchestrated voices. In The Curtain, Kundera writes of the despotic authority of story. And I believe music's greatest gift to the future novelist was a skill set that allowed him to become an even better composer of prose. Like some of his 18th century literary heroes, Kundera would not allow his novels, quote, to suffocate in the long corridor of a causal chain of events. Hence, we get the disruptions, interventions, time shifts that are the hallmarks of the Kundera books we know and love, or the Kundera books we will get to know and love through the book club. Hence the difficulty and currently impossibility, for rights reasons, of adapting Kundera for the screen. Hence his famous insistence that, quote, the novel's sole raison d'etre is to say what only the novel can say. And I'll stop there for now.
Thanks, Robert. Nobody knows if I can. Can you hear me? Is this working? Joke. Right? So, what happened to the missing Czech writer? What happened to the missing Czech writer? He moved to Prague. Oh no, you'll get it once you read the joke. The whole point, what we heard just now from Robert, you've got this sense that somehow what it meant for Kundera, I'm not going to say it quite correctly, I asked Alice how to say it, but what it meant for Kundera to move to France wasn't about abandoning that entire scene that he was writing about, but it had already been abandoned when he moved to Prague. And the joke is about this kind of moment. The other joke I was going to tell is, you know what the definition of a professor is, right? It's someone who talks in other people's sleep. So, the idea for the joke that you'll get to for the next time that you read it is that you've got this sense of humor that's missing. And a lot of the sense of humor problem is that it's situational. What's it mean to be in a situation is the big question that he puts in front of us. When he talks about what's that revelation, the truth in the writing, it has to be situated. When he talks about existentialism, the famous slogan from Jean-Paul Sartre is existence precedes essence. You exist, then you name it. It's not that you've got this kind of world where there are words up there and you embody some word. You don't get born somewhere and then embody the identity of the place where you were born. You're born somewhere and you live. And then when people say, what's it mean to be Moravian? They point to the people who exist in Moravia. That's a very necessary understanding of what's going on in Kundera. Now, why am I know almost nothing about literature, really. I enjoy it. I don't study it. I kind of bathe in it. Now, what happens in Kundera is interesting politically and philosophically. And I think I've come to believe that it's incredibly relevant right now. And I want to explain just a couple of philosophical things really quickly in terms of this idea. Think about jokes and situations, being in a place. Somehow, what it means to be Czech is not that you're from Prague, but he's already given up parts of his identity by moving to Prague. He's given up part of the joke. You go back and forth, the functionary that ruins his life is jealous of the fact that he's from Moravia. He's jealous of Kundera for that, or the main character for that. And yet, he doesn't quite get why the specificity of the joke works, right? That kind of missing what the specifics mean. That's the point about the existentialism. What's that got to do with the politics of our moment? Well, those of you who are my age may be kind of disappointed that we seem to be stuck in the 1960s. We're still fighting the same culture wars. We still have this kind of like, what's going on back and forth? Sounds very familiar over and over again. Well, there was this great, huge opposition that we had between communism and capitalism, these two ideologies. And one of the things that I think is essential about Kundera that we're going to read is that he did not want to be identified with either team. He had a very deep sense that a sense of humor based in that situation, honesty about what was revealed in front of you, writing about it in the right way, could not duplicate the ruts that we were in, could help us move out of that political stalemate that he already felt that we were in. And that I feel that we're in right now. Right? How can we move past that stalemate? Was this question already in 1968? Now, what are the clues? One of the things that I think Robert already pointed out, he does not tell you what people are thinking. He describes how they are in the situation. You don't have interior monologue. It's not like James Joyce, where you're just hearing their consciousness. He tells you, Tomas thought this, he felt this, but he's telling you, he's describing the situation. And he's using very philosophical terms. If you've seen the movie Unbearable Lightness of Being, it didn't age very well. It feels like softcore porn, right? It's just like sex that's thrown in these weird ways. The book doesn't read that way. The book is very carefully articulated so that you're describing these interactions between people, and those interactions become something more than any individual. So it's not really written from Tomas's point of view. Now, why is that important? Philosophically, the Descartes kind of question. When you say, I think, therefore I am, you fall into the risk that you're going to be like the Matrix. Everything that you think somehow is produced, right? It's somehow projected onto your mind, and you're only just interpreting things. You produce an interpretation of what's happening, and it's your interpretation. What we mean by critique, going back to Kant, picks up on this. So that if I have a critical reading of someone or someone else, what I do is I look at all of the conditions of their production of that ideology, and I try and say, oh, that's ideological production. Get to an honest production, get to a different type of production, or get to a pure production. All of that looking for purity had to do with the idea that fundamentally knowledge and truth was produced from a single person perspective. Right? That's the Descartes moment. What you get with Cervantes, that he's picking up with the idea of the novel, and I think Robert really picks up on, is you don't have that moment of certainty. There's no truth located in the self. You've got these situations. And those situations have truth in them, but they're in the situations, not in the self-interpreting. And that means that you should be looking for a purity test. The idea that you do a self-critique in the Maoist tradition, or that you're looking for, I am never going to say a wrong word in this situation. Those types of purity tests are anathema to what Kundera is trying to do. And the joke is about trying to get away from that, trying to get a sense of humor back, trying to get a sense that, oh, yeah, we're talking about situations. There's all sorts of ethics, there's all sorts of things that you have to think about. It's not like there's no wakefulness, right? But it's not a woke moment of being attentive to very specific words. There's no catchword that you can say that catches you off guard, that points to how you're living ideologically. So you get away from ideology, not by becoming pure, not by refusing somehow to belong to a group, right? So you're neither the capitalist individualist who lives completely by themselves, nor the communist who lives without ideology because they understand how all production works. You're in this confused middle space where you're working with each other, where situations emerge, where it's not quite clear what's going on. And you're thinking about it. You'll read these books, he's very smart. He thinks really hard about these things. But he doesn't know. And he's not asking you to take the identity as the starting point. In the same way, get back to my joke, he's not asking you to see him as Moravian. He's not somehow writing from his identity and asking you to see his identity and say, oh, that's a good identity. I'd like to be like that. Or I speak from my identity. He's saying, I am trying to make sense of these situations. I'm trying to reveal the truth of what's happening in front of us. And in that revelation, in that truth, you see existence in its complexity, in its uncertainty, and in its greater truth.
Thanks, Dan.
Can we try and get some comments from the?
Yeah,
I can carry
more
this.
voices. Milan Kundera was a great believer in polyphony, so let's hear many voices or more voices.
The panelists or anyone in the audience know about how Václav Havel and the intellectuals, also many of the literary intellectuals, felt about Kundera. They finally kicked the Communist Party out.
I have discovered that there are complicated views of many negative views of Kundera among Czech intellectuals. And I've got one story, an anecdote about that to kind of finish up with. But certainly, I mean, I was so starry-eyed, and all my friend circle were so starry-eyed about Milan Kundera in the late 80s. And then I started meeting Czech people and realizing that there was a coolness towards him. First of all, that Havel stayed and he left. And Havel did award him a very great honor, but he didn't go to the Czech Republic to the award ceremony. He never made a public appearance in the Czech Republic after the fall of the Berlin Wall. Anytime he went back, it was just a private family visit. Havel, let's see, various people said, he said some very complimentary things about Havel when Havel died. And of course, he was given a very high civic honor by President Havel. One thing, I mean, I got to, this is really strange, but one of my best friends, somebody who became the best man at our wedding here in Houston 30 years ago, the first time I ever met him, he ever appeared on my radar, is he quoted Milan Kundera in a class, Trinity College Dublin in 1989. So it's kind of uncanny. There was this guy who said, yeah, well, Milan Kundera says that, you know, his writing is all about exploring the unrealized possibilities of his life. I thought, this guy's cool. He's quoting Milan Kundera. We should become friends. We became very good friends. He moved to Prague and he's never left. He married a Czech woman. He teaches at 2 Czech universities. He translates Czech poetry. He's got fairly critical views of Kundera. And his wife, the Czech writer, teacher, and painter, Teresa Limanova, I've had some really interesting conversations with her about Kundera. And the first area of coolness is, well, he left and we stayed. The second is, he was in the Communist Party twice. It's like that Oscar Wilde quote, you know, to have joined the Communist Party once may be regarded as a misfortune. To have joined the Communist Party twice looks like carelessness. So that was always a mic drop moment in Prague. Oh yeah, he was a communist twice. Now, he was always on the more liberal side, shall we say, of the Communist Party, whatever that means. And but he was kicked out of the party during the first purge, circa 1950. He rejoined in 1952. All through his years teaching in the famous film school in Prague, he was a member of the party, and he was purged like 2/3 of the party membership during normalization in 1969, 1970. The people who I've talked to who are, if not critics of Kundera, quite cool about Kundera, they still really respect the joke. That there's great respect for that novel more than for the novelist. And my Czech friends tell me, yeah, in the early 80s, before liberation, we used to pass around a copy of the joke, a Zamostat, you know, or old copy of it, and it was one of the books to read if you were a rebellious teen. Yeah.
I'm going to add one thought, which is that Havel's got this great essay, Politics, where he's talking about the problem with the shopkeepers in Prague having a window, workers of the world union. It's not that it's wrong, it's that it's empty. Right? it's a slogan that has no real content anymore. It's been repeated so much. And I think that there's a real interesting existentialist moment there. It draws philosophically Kundera and Paul together, because I think that Kundera's problem with the West and the kind of after the fall of the wall was that he was worried that it was commercialism, kitsch, and emptiness, and that there was this kind of repetition to it. So he wasn't one of those people who was going to be on the bandwagon saying, hey, communism's dead, we've got triumphant Western capitalism going. Because he was worried that it was going to be the same problem of empty repetition instead of these difficult but honest novels over and over again. Yes.
I just have a comment. It is not workers of the world that unite, it's a proletariat of all nations unite. That was the slogan. And proletariat is not workers. I mean, my parents were workers. They were. Proletariat is a political worker. Yes, my goodness. And that is why that was not a acceptable slogan. It's not workers, it's proletariat. It's the people who believe in communism. All of you unite. Just wanted to make that distinction. My English might be accented, but correction is.
Correction is always accepted, but I'm going to push back. Paul's point was that it was an empty slogan. So the point was that it was absolutely empty. It didn't matter what the actual words were. So whether it was one thing or another, it didn't matter because it was empty. The point that it was
And I still can say it in Czech.
Other thoughts? Good. Corrections? Corrections are welcome.
You were talking about the film.
Uh,
What was Kundera's idea about that film?
he hated it.
Okay.
And he never allowed, that's why I was talking about the rights situation. He never allowed the rights of any other book to be sold. And if you listen to any of the great audio book versions there are out there, there was a whole series of them done about 10 years ago. It says, any adaptation for theater, radio, film, or television is strictly forbidden. So, and he probably regretted selling the rights of Unbearable Lightness of Being. I do think there is one wonderful sequence in the film, directed by Philip Kaufman, which is the montage of the Prague Spring, where the soundtrack is a Czech band singing Hey Jude in Czech. And then there's an incredible edit in the middle of it. I think it's been 35 years since I saw the film. That really sticks in my mind as a great film sequence. And I think in the same way that he argued that the sole reason for the novel is to say what only the novel can say, I think a film has got to operate along the lines of, it's got to use the logic of film. A film, the sole raison d'etre for a film is to say what only film could say. And I think Kaufman trusted himself as a filmmaker for those 5 minutes and didn't quite for the rest of the adaptation. But it's got Daniel Day-Lewis, Juliette Binoche, and it's got some great actors in it. But it was an impossible task, I think, to try and turn that book into.
It's important to have beautiful people. So I think the thing I would add too is that it's very important that Kafka wasn't an avant-garde artist in these books. He wasn't trying to force you into a personal reappraisal of your feelings. He wasn't making that kind of critical move that we associate with avant-garde art, where you sit there and go like, oh, this concept forces me to rethink my essence. He was trying to get you to enter into a world where these situations, these conflicting, storylines, and these ways in which you're trying to understand what's going on and all that confusion, reveal something. And it's not that hard. It's very hard to put the words to it, but it's not that hard to see what's going on. You don't sit back there and say, oh, I was wrong my entire life. now I've taken the red pill and I see everything for the first time. There's not that type of critical enlightenment. He's drawing you into a lived experience that's complicated and that is full. It's hard to repeat.
I agree with that. And going back to the earlier question, I think Václav Havel was consistently a liberal, a European liberal of the old school throughout his life. And I think Kundera, maybe it took him until he was 40 to realize that he really was a European liberal of the old school. And like the sort of a more old-fashioned brand of liberalism, there's no moment of apotheosis in that brand of liberalism, right? There's no ecstatic moment of revelation where one realizes, oh, okay, so all the people of this particular class or type will inherit the earth. There's a lack of hubris in that kind of approach to the world. Any other questions, comments?
Yeah,
Wendy.
remember 68 in Prague, intellectuals rarely spoke about him. He was not part of any particular movement, and he didn't seem to be a part of sort of the Czech New Reform. I think people intellectuals resented that of him. But I also think that he, in his writings, he never thinks there is a truth. There is no one truth. There is no truth to be known.
Mm.
And I think that influenced his behavior very
I think that's a great point. And another contrast to him, Wendy, I know that you personally, Milos Forman, who's another, of course, one of the icons of the Prague Spring. And I'd like to know myself more about their relationship. There is one of the stories, one of the later stories in Laughable Loves. This guy pretends he is Milos Forman to try and sweet talk a young woman in a provincial town. And they must have known each other through FAMU, the famous film school, where Forman, of course, was one of the leading lights. Kundera had studied film, but he stayed on to be the lecturer in world literature. And I would imagine there was a considerable rivalry between the two of them. And maybe that's why he turned against film too. I would like to read more about that, but it's very rare that he makes those contemporary, like completely contemporary references. And that's in a story that he would have written in the mid to late 60s. And of course, Milos Forman was becoming an international artist at that stage through the Fireman's Ball.
Yeah.
Other questions?
At Forman, in the late 60s, his work was very intimate and low-key, completely different than his later work when he left in the 70s and basically became, a citizen of the U.S.
Well, that is interesting. Both of them, these great sons of the Prague Spring, both of them became decidedly less Czech and perhaps less interesting. I mean, James Joyce, and Kundera was a very different kind of novelist, Joyce, but he revered James Joyce, talks a lot about Ulysses in his nonfiction. Joyce also moved to Paris famously, but he never stopped writing about Ireland. And I think there's a danger for an artist to get away from the source, whether that source is Prague or Dublin or Houston. No matter how universal you want your books to be in terms of their existential appeal, I think there's a certain magic in the source material. And for me, there's a big distinction between those first 6 books that are the decidedly Czech side of Kundera's achievement, and then the later 7 or 8 works of fiction. And guess what? All of what we're reading were written in Czech and were preoccupied with matters Bohemian.
I wonder if I could invite maybe one last word from the audience. If anyone's got anything they'd like to say? No? So if not, I think we should talk practicalities, don't you, Alice? Like, so this was all Alice's idea. So I'm going to throw you on the spot. You have to come up with a little bit with us. I think part of it was this is an experiment, right? We'd like to figure out how to have a conversation. We don't want to be lecturing every time, right? So, but how do you have a conversation with people that would be interested in talking about these books, picking out some passages, talking about things on different days. We've got some data coming up. Johanna, I don't know if you have some ideas about how to organize it practically, or you want to
Well,
around a little bit?
I mean, I'm just going to brainstorm, but this whole idea came about, he passed away last year. And somebody pointed out to me that, the New York Times and Der Spiegel and what's the French? Le Monde all covered his death at the same time. It's very enlightening to talk to you, and obviously, but I think what was not unique to him, but what was important about him, that his books, and you talked about it very well, is yes, they are set maybe in the Czech Republic, but what happens to the characters, it just speaks to all people. And so his works have been translated to many and many languages and were popular, but since he passed away, it kind of, I got an email from somebody that just said, Alice, Milan Kundera passed. He was one of the greats, and that was it. And so that started this whole thing. And so we just thought it would be very nice to have an introduction to a little bit about his life or his style, and that will set a nice tone for us now to delve into his novels. And it's always nice to have some background, and so people can look for certain things while they read, and it will speak much more deeply to them. And so our next plan is to meet again on, we thought we'll meet on the leap day, because nobody will have plans on a leap day, right? It's an extra day. So we're going to leap into the joke. So you all have until February 29th to read the joke. And we are going to meet here again and discuss that book. And in the meantime, the four of us will have to come up with the format, but it will be a lot more of a discussion. And okay, my husband has a comment, of course. But I do have one idea for you all. I recently reread The Joke and The Unbearable Likeness of Being, and reading both of the books, I had this moment where I read something and it just struck my core, and I had to stop and say just, wow. And so I was thinking it might be really fun for all of you to maybe, if you, to write down a little quote, or if there's a paragraph that really strikes your fancy or just has any deep meaning to you, maybe that would be a fun thing to throw around and share. But, so thank you. So, okay. Yes? Okay. Yeah.
I was just going to say that I wrote about page 100 of the joke, and I thought it would be kind of fun to talk about one of the topics I think we should think about is the similarities of today. I mean, it's so hard for a comedian to crack a joke without offending, half of the audience and running the risk of being canceled. And to me, at least, it's quite parallel to what happens in the book.
Okay, so another topic for this. So please read the joke, and Robert has a joke.
Yes,
to end
yes,
on,
yes,
and we
yes.
all hope to get back, together on the 29th of February.
I cut out a little bit I'd written. Anybody really wants to hear, they can talk to me later about that other great icon and hero of Kundera from the Czech lands, Kafka. And Kafka, his stories often begin with a joke, but the joke becomes really serious. And this is also a kind of anecdote that becomes kind of serious. Not everybody appreciated Kundera's commitment to what he called thinking novels. In the summer of 1990, right after graduating from college in Ireland, and at the height of my initial Kundera phase, I attended a seminar at the Abbey Theatre, our national theatre. One of the speakers was the distinguished Czech man of letters, Zdeněk Urbanek. Anybody know of him? There's a plaque unveiled to him in Prague recently. Mr. Urbanek, who had done everything from translating James Joyce's Dubliners, we loved that at the Abbey, to influencing Václav Havel. In fact, I read an obituary of him that said that he was a kind of father figure, intellectual father figure for Václav Havel. This was less than a year after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and it was something of a thrill to be in the presence of a real live Czech dissident and intellectual. During a coffee break, I struck up a conversation with the great man. And of course, I asked him rather naively, what did he think of Milan Kundera? Mr. Urbanek replied with great deliberation, I think the problem with Kundera is that he intellectualizes everything. And that is all I have to say about Kundera. That was the first, but not the last time that I learned that Czech attitudes to Milan Kundera can be complicated. Kundera himself would have heard a lot of homespun criticism of his work, both from official and dissident channels over the decades. And he had a robust response to this line of argument, that he was an overly intellectual writer. Kundera saw his literary project as, in part, a corrective to the imagination of writers such as Dostoevsky. As he explains in his 1981 introduction to his play, Jacques and His Master, based on the playful, enlightened work of his beloved Denis Diderot, quote, what irritated me about Dostoevsky was the climate of his novels, a universe where everything turns into feeling. Of course, Kundera goes on to say, man cannot do without feelings, but the moment they are considered values in themselves, criteria of truth, justifications for kinds of behavior, they become frightening. And on that cheery note, I'll leave it for this evening. Thank you.
We're going to send out an email invitation, and we'll think that Alice had a great idea, which is that if you have a particular sentence or a paragraph or a scene that really attracts you, we'll give you a place to email that to, and then we'll start the conversation talking about why you thought that was a piece. Right? And you'll be the ones talking about me. Hopefully, it's going to be a book club, not a lecture. Thanks very much.
That link actually will be on our website on the page for you to be able to come on the 29th. So remember, Leap Day, leap into the joke. It'll be wonderful. If you haven't seen our permanent exhibits, they are on the 3rd floor and we are still open if that's something that you are interested in. If not, thank you very much for coming here this evening. All of our programming is involving education, and it is done in partnership with various donors and individuals. And if you like what we do, please visit our website and drop us a note. Thank you for coming this evening.
Yeah. Any expressive. Hi.
Calling him an organism. That was.